All right, let's go here. Let's get this out of the way. Let's see my notes. Okay, there we go. All right, good to see you all. I forgot that last week. Let me check my calendar here. It was actually this week. I'm sorry. We have the start of an important month. I don't know why they start it almost in the middle of the month, and why it doesn't start at the beginning of the month, but that's just the way it works. Does anyone know what month it is? Not September. I'll give you that little clue. Does anyone hear about what month it is? Maybe you heard it on the news, or I don't know. No? No one knows what month it is? What special month it is? Yes, no? It is Hispanic Heritage Month. Yes. Which I like to honor when it rolls around each time of the year by talking about Hispanic Catholics. Hopefully, usually Americans. I try to gear it towards American Catholics who are on their way to sainthood. We're going to be declared saints by the Catholic Church, so I keep a religious angle on it, of course. And today I want to talk about this gentleman who is, I think, the only Hispanic actual saint from America, or kind of America, what later became America, is Junipero Serra y Ferrer. I'm going to make my notes bigger or put my eyeglasses on. Or Juniper. I like Juniper, but I'll go with the Spanish. Junipero. Saint Junipero. You got me, my friend. Not today, Satan. Junipero Serra, as he's commonly known. There's a picture of him. I don't know if it's an accurate picture. Oh, that's interesting. It comes up on the computer screen, too. There we go. I don't know if that's an accurate representation of what he looked like, but there you go. You got something to look at. And you can tell, maybe some of you can tell from his habit, his uniform, he was a Franciscan friar, a group founded by a man named St. Francis of Assisi back in the early 1200s AD. Also a very holy man, very good man. And so his order is called the Order of Friars Minor of the Lesser Brothers, but they're also commonly called the Franciscans after Francis, who founded them. So he was a Franciscan friar who was sent to the New World. He was not from here. Sent to the New World that was discovered to evangelize, to help set up the Catholic Church. He himself was Spanish, Hispania. So Hispanic, that's where Hispanic comes from. And actually, it's interesting because we need to distinguish, because Hispania is the name for the province of Spain, what we call Spain today. But most people from the New World that we just call naturally Hispanics are actually not Hispanics. They're Native Americans. People from Mexico and Central and South America. I mean, there was some blending in of, blending in of the what you might call biology from people intermarrying. But for the most part, it's Hispanic culture that people took over, and the language, they're speaking Spanish, although a lot of people still speak the native languages, the Native American languages. So ethnically, really, the people, you look at a Mexican, you say, oh, that's an Hispanic. Well, they're Native Americans. They're still around, people. We didn't get rid of them. They're still here. They were here first, before us. But they've taken over Hispanic culture in Hispanic ways because, of course, from the history, the Spanish colonized and settled a large part of the New World, including the United States at one point. Don't know if they want it back, but... Yes. Anyway, so he was actually born on the island of Majorca, which I visited once. I was an exchange student to a school over in Ireland for 9 months. I think we have exchange programs here as well in Gwyn and Mercy, where you can go and spend a year at another school in another country. I went to Ireland, and while I was there, since I had the money, decided to take a little trip down to Spain and go to the island of Majorca, beautiful island. So actually, I've been where he was born. He was born there in 1713. 1713, and he died in 1784. And he was sent over here, as I said, as a missionary by his order. And he mostly focused on what is now California. So that's where you get the connection to the United States. And you could call him an Hispanic American, although even, as you can see from his date, he died a long time before, I think even California was its own republic and then was incorporated into the United States. But today it's now part of the United States. So I'll say that's good enough for my purposes, right? You know, my purposes, good enough. So he went over, he began his ministry in what is now California in 1769, and he went basically up and down what is the current present state of California, establishing missions, which were, you know, like little outposts where new Christians, the Native Americans, who had converted or changed over to Christianity, could stay. When he came over, he was already rather oldish, I guess you could say. He was 56. He was asthmatic, so he suffered from asthma, and they didn't have inhalers back then, people. And he also had some kind of ulcer on one of his legs, I guess an incurable ulcer, so he had to deal with that. So he limped, and you know, as you can imagine, there were no cars back then, so he was basically on a mule or a donkey or something, riding up and down constantly to these missions, founding them and also visiting them and stuff like that. So the guy was hardcore. A lot tougher than I am, a lot tougher than I could ever be. And he eventually died at one of his missions, the mission of Charles Borromeo. Does it say where that was located? No, I didn't put that down in my notes. But he died apparently of tuberculosis, which I know it's a disease of some kind. I forget what it does to the body, but anyways. Yes, he was declared blessed. There are the various levels of becoming a holy person. First, the church, and I think I'll talk a little bit about this when I get to the saints in later class, but I'll just mention it now. You know, where a person is just simply recognized as a very good person. They went above and beyond. They were, you know, maybe better than your average Christian. And so they're recognized as a servant of God. So that's where you start out. They open the case, basically, the investigation. Once you're recognized as a servant of God, they start investigating your life, your writings, if you've left any, how you lived your life, to see that, you know, was this a person a saint, really? Did this person live in the presence of God all the time? Was God number one in their life? And if there seems to be good evidence tending towards that, then the person can be declared venerable. So you have servant of God, SOG, then you've got venerable, which means the person is honorable. The person can now be honored. You can have official honors for the person, prayer cards, all that good stuff. And it becomes and then the process starts to really kind of get going, because you have a good indication the person was probably worthy of being called a saint, which is kind of like the church's Hall of Fame, if you will, you know, if that helps you understand it. Then you're waiting, then you're waiting for a miracle. You're waiting for some kind of supernatural evidence, some kind of data. You have the person's life, but you want some kind of evidence from God, and you're looking for something that that can't be explained by natural means or scientific means. And, you know, so you're looking for a miracle. And if that happens, then the person can be declared blessed. So they become a blessed. And then finally, you look for a second miracle, another miracle to bump you all the way up to saints. We're like, okay, one miracle could be a coincidence. You know, we could have gotten, hopefully we didn't get it wrong, but you never know. Two miracles, two weird things, unusual things happening. That's probably an indication that the person, you can go ahead and say the person was a saint. So that's just the level. So he he was beatified. What date? What did I say here? In 1988, he was declared blessed. So he was servant of God, and he was venerable before that. And then Pope Francis, the current Pope, declared him a saint in 2015. Not without controversy, because, when you're dealing with how Native Americans were treated in the old days, and maybe even today as well, it wasn't good. It wasn't a good situation. And the church was in the thick of that, because with the invaders, you might call them, or the colonists, came also priests and missionaries who were doing their thing, and the colonists were doing their thing. The interesting thing about, and sometimes the missions were seen as bad things. They were there to keep control over the native population, keep them in one place where the friars could use them to work for them and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that wasn't going on as well. I'm not saying they were enlightened people, but they also, part of the reason they had these missions was to keep them away from the other Spaniards. The other Christians, because they knew that the Spanish soldiers and businessmen and people that came over with them and were colonizing places like California were maybe not living a Christian life and would mistreat the natives. So they wanted to actually separate them from their own people. They thought it was safer for them to live with them in the missions than to live amongst other Spaniards. Also to live amongst Native Americans, because there was the possibility of being killed just for being a Christian, just because you were different. That's tribal culture. Difference is not respected. There's no freedom of conscience or liberty there. You do what the community does, and if you don't, then you're a danger to the community and you have to be gotten rid of. So that was another reason for the protection of the Native Americans who did become Christians. So anyway, so there he is, and I asked for St. Juniper's prayers for us as we begin this Hispanic Heritage Month. And next class on Thursday, I'll talk about somebody else who's on his or her way, hopefully, to sainthood. But sometimes they just stay at a certain level. Sometimes people stay at venerable for a long, long time. I don't know why they don't make it up to saint. They don't get the miracles. I don't know why God just doesn't send the miracles in their case, but it happens. In his case, he got the miracles, and so now he's up to sainthood. Not that he wasn't a saint before. I mean, it's just a declaration of what a person already was. Hopefully he was already a good person before. Okie dokie. Moving on to the lecture. Yes, it's that time of year. Okay, sources of authority. Hopefully I'll finish it today. If I don't, continue with the what you're doing on the syllabus, doing the readings on the syllabus or looking at the syllabus, even if I am off of it, because sometimes I talk more than I should. I hopefully don't ramble, but I talk more than I should. And it takes me longer to finish. So hopefully I'll finish sources of authority today. But if I don't, just continue with the syllabus. I'll certainly finish it next Thursday, I think. And where do we end? Talking about tradition. I want to get to magisterium today, hopefully, God willing. Yes, I got past that. Oh, did I do that? I don't even know why I put this on. Bunch of Protestants burning stuff with the Pope as the Antichrist. I don't know why I put that on there. I don't know. Pope is the Antichrist. It makes me laugh. Okay. So finishing up talking about sacred tradition and moving on to teaching authority, which is magisterium. Tradition is what's handed on. And we might even say that tradition is really more, there's this interrelationship between the sacred writings and what's handed on, the oral preaching of the church, okay? But really, you could say that the tradition is more primary in a sense, because even the sacred writings come out of that tradition. They're encapsulations, like the New Testament. They were already preaching about Jesus before they wrote anything down about him. And, but eventually you get sacred writings, people are like, we really should write some of this stuff down, It's almost like a snapshot. It's a crystallization of the tradition that was at that time in the first century. But it continues on. The story keeps getting passed on and preached and proclaimed. So there's that interrelationship. The church has always had some form of sacred writing because it had the writings of the Jews, develops its own sacred writings out of its own traditions of what it's preaching about Jesus, but also not everything is contained in those sacred writings. They don't include absolutely everything the church believes. It's all of a piece, one might say, all one cloth. You don't have one or the other, just a book or just the oral preaching. The two are going together. And so I just want to cross stuff out. So the church, the scripture you might look at as the church's written memory. Maybe that's a good word to use for tradition. It's the memory of the church about the Jesus that she knew and that the church has preached. So that with that memory, the church can say, well, that's not Jesus. When other writings appear that claim to be about Jesus or by the apostles, the church can be like, that's not how we've remembered him. That's not how we've been proclaiming him. Even if those writings might have been written with the best of intentions, I'll talk about some of those stuff later when we get into the Bible and canonicity. So the scriptures are the written memory, scriptura, but the tradition or sacred tradition, you could say, is the lived memory, the actual living memory of Christians living out the gospel of their memory of who Jesus is. Okay, so it's the development of the message. So there is change in a way, okay? It's not, there is some development. Probably development is a better word to use because it's not like change in the sense of, well, we said X and now we're saying Y, okay? It's more like we said A, now we're saying B, now we're saying C, the progression of the alphabet in a sense like that. All right, we're adding more stuff to the basis of what we already know. Because when you've read the Gospels, hopefully, or started reading some of them, or some of the Bible, God's not a big explainer. He's not big on the explanations. And nor was Jesus. When Jesus, for example, keeps referring to God as his Father, okay, but that's an ambiguous term. It can be understood biologically, physically. It can be understood symbolically, metaphorically. And no one actually asks anywhere in the Gospels, or at least nothing's been recorded of someone actually saying, okay, Jesus, I got to pin you down on this. Why do you keep talking about God as your father? You don't mention Joseph, okay, who's apparently your biological father, this Jewish guy, Joseph. You keep mentioning God, as Jews, What do you mean? That never happens. So all you have is the church. You don't have a written memory of that, but you do have the lived memory of the church of, we know what Jesus preached to us through his apostles passed that on to what he meant by that. Okay. So that's what's going on there. Yeah. Okay. I think I mentioned that as well. So I'll move on. As with any organization, you have the things that people talk about. I think this is a sociological reality with any human society. People talk about stuff and they pass on stories, okay, about things. Maybe sometimes things get written down for later generations. Or you record it in some way. You could say you recorded a video or something and put it on YouTube. That's kind of what. But their interpretation needs to happen because when you have a book and you have words in front of you, even when you understand what they literally mean, the letters, litera, you can't interrogate it. You can't ask questions of it, really, because you don't have the author in front of you. All right? Or the person that, like I just said about Jesus. You can read, Jesus can say, I and the Father are one. Short, simple statement, but number one, what do you mean by Father? And then further, what do you mean by one, Jesus? One's not very clear. It might be clear in mathematics, or maybe not. Give me a definition of one. What is one? Anyone theoretical mathematicians here? No. Okay. Well, I'm not either, so I won't even attempt that. I remember there was one book. I have it on my computer. It was just too good to leave aside. Bertrand Russell, a great philosopher. Well, yeah, he's a good philosopher and mathematician, big into math. And he wrote a book, Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles. And I think it took him 400 pages to do a proof. He had to do a proof, because sometimes in math you do proofs, to prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2. And 400 pages to do the proof. For just something as simple as that in mathematics. You just take it for granted. I mean, we take it so much for granted, it's like the mic drop in an argument. That's so obvious. It's like 1 plus 1 equals 2. Obvious, right? Well, 400 pages obvious. After 400 pages, you'll understand it's obvious. But no one had ever done it before. That's why he did it. And then the co-author, I forget who the co-author of the book was. That's why he did it. Because no one had done a proof of it. They just assumed that it was true. But was it true? So I and the Father are one. Okay, Jesus said that. Maybe. I assume he did, What's the meaning? Interpretation. Magisterium, a teaching authority. Some authority, someone who has authority to interpret. Like the author of a book has authority. That's kind of magisterium. Can tell me what he or she meant when writing the book. That's magisterium, a teaching authority. We accept it in other realms of human existence. The Supreme Court. The court system itself is all based on teaching authority, where you have precedent based on precedent, and a judge looks at previous decisions and then constructs his or her own decision based on what are the traditions, one might say, that have gone before. What does the Constitution mean? Okay, you have to understand what because it was written so long ago, over 200 years ago, 220 some years ago. Or was it 240? I forget. The church is no different as a human institution, even though it is believed to be a supernatural institution and involved in supernatural things, Ms. Tumulty, way back in the back. Yes, can you see this? Magisterium is Tumulty, from the Latin word magister, which means teacher or master. That's where we get our word master from, magister, teacher, which is further based on the Latin word magis, which means to be greater or higher than, which kind of shows you how teachers view themselves. Anyways, excuse me, that's what rabbi means, the same thing. It comes from the Hebrew word rav, which means my great one. So, rabbi means my great one. So it's just a title of respect for a teacher. So a magister. So magisterium is the name for the teaching office, the teaching authority that the church has as Christ's community to authentically interpret the revelation God has given to her in Christ, and also ensure that she's faithful to it, that the church, the community, is faithful to it, that it doesn't veer off into odd avenues, one might say. So there were and are, as in any community, I think, special members who have been, in the case of the church, who were given by Jesus himself. This we do know. This is explicit in the Gospels, in the stories about Jesus. These people were given explicit authority by Jesus himself and given a special role with special powers and authority amongst his general followers. And I think I mentioned them before, the apostles, yes? I read apostle, okay. He gave them a special name. He calls them apostles, gives them a special name within the community. So he doesn't call his other followers by this name. He has a group. And he specifically chooses a specific number of this group, which are 12. Of all the people who are following him, male and female, he chooses 12 men. And that number 12 is very interesting just because it has a symbolic value for Jews, because of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 family clans of this man Jacob, also known as Israel, from which the Jews descended. Their ancestor, one of their ancestors. So Jesus seems to be acting symbolically here, like a prophet, by choosing specifically 12 men, almost as a representation of the 12 tribes, like Jesus is reconstituting the people of Israel in a way, gathering them together. So even though there are apostles, but there's a more specific group called the 12, the 12. And they were the men chosen by Jesus to share in his earthly ministry, and especially to be witnesses of the resurrection and to continue the ministry after he was gone. Okay, but especially to be witnesses, to give proof to people. Okay, God's not stupid. He knows the resurrection's a hard sell. People are skeptical, and they should be. So he wants witnesses. He wants especially these guys to be able to say that we saw this. Okay, it's not a concoction or something that we just wanted to happen. Would have been nice if Jesus had risen from the dead. No, they can actually say it did happen. And so these 12 are especially chosen. And they continue on what Jesus is doing after. The word apostello, apo means away from, and stello means to send. So the Greek word simply means to send forth, to send someone out, like an ambassador or an emissary. In fact, emissary is a literal translation into Latin, emisso, or emitto, I should say, of the Greek, to send out, send forth. So he sends them forth. Okay, he doesn't say, stay here with me. Jesus is not like some kind of cult leader, like we're going to build a compound and we're all going to stay here with me because it's all about me. No, he wants them to go out. I've given you this powers and authority. I trust you. Go out. Preach my message. Do what I'm doing. Doesn't have to be looking over their shoulder 24 hours a day. He has trust in his apostles. He sends them out and all his followers in a way. So he sends them out. They're meant to be eyewitnesses to what God is doing at that time and has done in Jesus and revealed in him. Okay. I think I talk about the apostles more later, so I can maybe skip over that. John chapter 14. Yes. So in the readings, if you did the readings, or maybe I'll get to that when I turn the page. Okay, maybe I'll get to that when I get to the page. I'll get to John in a second. These 12 men, they were special. Jesus gave them exclusive insight. And I guess I will talk more deeply about this when I talk about the apostles in the church, but I'll just tell you this now. He gave them exclusive insight into his ministry, and especially about who he was, that they should understand who he was. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but does anyone know what the gospel reading was from this Sunday's Mass? Does anyone remember? I don't want to call on anybody because, I don't know. I wasn't listening anyway. No one remembers what the gospel reading was from the Gospel of Mark. I'll give you that hint. Anyone remember what part of the Gospel of Mark? It's an important scene. No one? Yes. It's you and me, my friend, and Jesus. Jesus and coffee. It's the scene in the Gospel of Mark. Miss Sembalak. Jesus gathers the 12. He actually takes them away by themselves. And he gathers them together. And he says, Mr. Fiorentino, who do the crowd say that I am? And the apostles are like, well, some of them think you're like John the Baptist come back from the dead, which makes no sense to me because they're contemporaries. John the Baptist was killed while Jesus was like 30. So anyways, they think you're a prophet. People think you're a prophet. Some people think you're Elijah. Elijah was like the end time prophet who's supposed to bring about the end of the world and stuff like that. All right, and Jesus is like, okay, now, but what do you say to me to be? What do you say, or who do you say that I am? So he puts the question to them. Apparently they hadn't really thought about this. Why were they following him? They had to have some belief about him or in him. And one of the apostles, this man named Simon Peter, pipes up and says, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. Which seems to be right. And then Jesus says, okay, shut up. Don't tell anybody. Why, we don't know. Probably because it would have gotten him killed. Well, maybe it did get him killed. But it's interesting. Out of the 12, in the story, it's not like all 12 say in unison, you're the Messiah. It's 1 out of 12 gets it right, The other 11, who knows what they thought? Maybe they agreed with the crowds. Jesus was a prophet He's a rabbi, a teacher. Who knows? But only one of them, or even maybe they did think he was the Messiah, but only one of them out of the 12 actually had the courage to say it to Jesus' face. This is what I believe. It's probably maybe why Jesus loved Peter so much. Doesn't mean Peter was his favorite necessarily. He had another disciple that he was apparently good friends with, but Peter was up there, probably because Peter just had that basic faith. Remember that when you think about the bishops in the church, you know? You got thousands of bishops in the Catholic Church. All right, you expect them to all be on the same page. Well, I expected the 12 apostles to be all on the same page. Apparently they weren't. Only one of them was. So you're the Christ. Who is he? Who am I? That's their message, to proclaim to the world who Jesus was. Specifically, first to the Jews, because it's important for them to know that Jesus is their Messiah. But then it expands out to the world. And he gives them the authority to preach this message, the same message that Jesus was preaching. And he gave them power to do what he was doing. And again, I'll talk about this more later. But, the fact that Jesus was performing apparently healings and casting out demons and stuff like that, they get the power to do the same thing. He's not jealous. He's not selfish. He gives it to them, So Jesus knows he's not going to be physically present. He didn't come to exist forever, get up on his throne and I'm here now, I'm the Messiah, boom. And Jesus plops himself down on his throne and that's it. There's more to the story. He knows he's not going to be physically present for a while. So it's the apostles who will teach his message. And so logically, in the teaching of the message, it's not just repetitive, but it's also developmental. You have to make decisions, interpretations as new questions arise. For example, when people start believing in Jesus who aren't Jews, wasn't Jesus just for the Jews? Wasn't he a Jewish religious reformer? One might say. Yeah, he was. So, and Jesus doesn't ever really talk much about whether his ministry is supposed to spread out to others. Jesus says, I have come to tend to, that's not the word he uses. I've come to seek out, to look for the lost sheep of Israel. He doesn't say the Gentiles, the non-Jews. So what happens when non-Jews are like, hey, I like this Jesus guy. I like his message, and they start finding fulfillment in Jesus. What do? Do you turn them away and say, well, no, this isn't for you. This is just for Jews? Or do you welcome them? You have to make an interpretation of what the will of Jesus would be. Because he's not there. He's there. You can pray to Jesus and stuff like that and receive guidance. And that's what he promises. He promises guidance. And this is where we get to the PowerPoint slide. John chapter 14. If you want to look in your Bible, if you have your Bible with you. Yes. I wonder. I'm sure if I had 10 Taylor Swift tickets to a concert and I just threw them out on the floor, Mr. Means, I'd have chaos. I'd have 20 people jumping on the floor, But if I just placed this book right here, I think slowly you'll start seeing the people moving away. Take it away, Ms. Jackson, right? I'm sorry. Do you have it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. What do I want you to read? Because I just have John chapter 14 here. I'm going to read the whole thing. Begin with verse 15, please.
If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you always, the Spirit of truth, which the world cannot accept, because it neither sees nor knows it. But you know it, because it remains with you and will be in you. I will not leave you orphans, I will come to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me, because I live and you will live. On that day, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I in you. Whoever has my commandments and observes them is the one who loves me. And whoever loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and reveal myself to him. Judas, not the Iscariot.
It's good. Oh, you're good. No, that's good.
Sorry. Said to him, Master, what happened that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world? Jesus answered and said to him, Whoever loves me will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, yet the word you hear is not mine, but that of the Father who sent me. I have told you this while I am with you. The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, that the Father will send in my name. He will teach you everything and remind you of all that I told you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. You heard me tell you, I am going away and I will come back to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And now I have told you this before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe. I will no longer speak much with you, for the ruler of the world is coming. He has no power over me, but the world must know that I love the Father and that I do just as the Father has commanded me. Get up, let us go.
Excellent. Thank you. Get up, let us go. And then she just talks for another chapter. Well, it's probably, a combination of discourses that Jesus gave here. So it's maybe jumbled or out of order. But anyways, because they don't actually go anywhere. But they will eventually go somewhere. Okay, so Jesus is talking about going away. And he's questioned on that. Judas, one of his apostles named Judas. We don't know much more about that. All that John wants to tell us, the writer of this gospel, is that he was not the Iscariot, so he's not the one who betrayed Jesus. One of the apostles named Judas says, God bless you, why will you reveal yourself to us but not to the world? Well, you're my revelation to the world, Judas. You're my followers are my revelation to the world. Okay? I've revealed myself to you, and you are bringing the revelation to others. Okay, but how do we know we're going to get it right? Well, first of all, he talks about love, frequently, several times in this discourse. But if you love me, then you do what I ask you to do. And if you love me, then the Father will love you. So he makes this connection to love and being faithful to what one says one believes about Jesus. If I say I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm trying to live according to what he says I should live as a Christian. If I say I'm a Christian. So you're the witness to the world. So they're not going to see me. They're not going to see me. He didn't reveal himself to everyone, like give everyone a revelation while he was on the planet. So everyone could see him at least once and say yay or nay and whatever. Say yes, you're saved, and no, you're damned. No, Jesus was right where he was in Israel, and few people knew him. Few people are on the planet. So it's through his followers that people know. Okay, spreading of the message about him, what he did and what he said. And it's also because of his followers that people will not maybe believe in Jesus. One of the greatest arguments against Jesus and believing in Christianity is not reason or whatever, science. It's Christians. They're usually the biggest obstacle. At least in my experience as a Christian, I can't imagine how many people have turned away. God have mercy on me. I'll find out in the afterlife. I might find out some people are in heaven because of me and things I did, but I might also find out that some people are not there because of me. God forbid. I hope not. But yeah, that's part of it. But how can we get the message right? Well, Jesus promises this thing called a person called an advocate. He says, I will send you a helper, an advocate. It's translated in different ways. The word in Greek is parakletos, and I think I might talk about that in a later class as well, but not sure. And it's translated here in the translation we're using, the New American Bible Revised Edition, as advocate, because they want to retain that kind of a connection to law and legal connotation, because it could be applied to a lawyer. A parakletos is an advocate, someone who speaks on your behalf. Okay? So an advocate, a lawyer, an attorney, you might say, I'll give you an advocate who will speak for you, who will remind you of the things that I want you to remember. So it's a supernatural thing that's going on here. It's not just you're relying on your memory. There are things that might be called to your memory. You might be inspired to remember and maybe inspired to write down by this parakletos, by this advocate, to remember about me and remember them accurately, that it's authentic and genuine, and that you're interpreting it properly. So Jesus makes an explicit promise. Twice he mentions this advocate, the Spirit of truth that will lead you into all truth. So he's not saying I've told you all the truth, because there's more truth to know. So you will be led later by this advocate into more truth. Parakletos. Oh, that's where. Okay, fine. And so these are the men he entrusts to his community as his special witnesses. They, of course, being men, they eventually, human beings, I should say, eventually will die. And so you just need successors. You need people to carry on. It doesn't end with them. It shouldn't end with them. Apparently, Jesus did not intend his church just to end with them. So they appoint others. How? I don't know. I wasn't there. Most importantly, maybe I don't give that definition. Oh, John 20:24. Thank you, Dr. Dunn. I'll pass on from this. It's the most important, but you know what? Don't worry about it. Sorry, Lord. I'm sure it's all good, Anyway, the apostolic succession, that the power and authority which Jesus gave was also transferred from his followers to others, from the apostles to others, to continue the same thing that they were doing, to preach the message of Jesus and to do what Jesus was doing for the salvation of the world. So succeeding to the apostles. Succession is based on the Latin word succedo, which means to come or to follow after something, to come after something. So a succeeding, not a superseding. Superseding means like a replacement, okay? And that's not what's going on here. You're not replacing the apostles. The apostles still have their unique place. And even in the case of Christianity, Christianity is not a replacement of Judaism. It's a fulfillment, a succeeding of God's revelation to Israel. Actually, Christianity and Judaism are sister religions. They actually come from around first century Judaism. There's a split, actually, in Judaism between those who are the Messianists, that we call Christians, who accept Jesus of Nazareth, and then the others, which come to call rabbinical Judaism, especially after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and that's what we have for Judaism today, which is branched off into different factions, more liberal, more conservative, et cetera, and so forth. So Christianity, it used to be the idea amongst religious studies scholars is that Christianity was kind of like an offshoot from the one Judaism, and actually looking at the evidence is like, no. From what we know of first century Judaism, there was first century Judaism, and then there's a change with Jesus of Nazareth, and also the destruction of the temple in 70. You have the Christians, and then you have the Jews who follow the teachings of the rabbis, the rabbinical Jews. So they're sister religions. So it's not like Jesus is saying, oh, all that stuff before was rubbish. We're superseding that. We're replacing that. No, he was a Jew. Of course not. He assumed the validity of the Jewish revelation, God's revelation to Israel. Now, those who were, so because you have a succession and not a replacement, because the apostles are a unique group, you have a different name, just a different word to distinguish someone who is in the role of an apostle, who has the authority and power of an apostle, but is only a successor to the apostles, not a replacement. And so you have a different name. Those chosen to assume or take over that role or position come to be called bishops. Bishops. And they are men who trace their authority back to the power and authority of the original 12, let's hope, the original 12 apostles, which of course ultimately comes from Jesus of Nazareth, and based on his spiritual power. And that's where the magisterium comes in. When we talk about magisterium, it's comprising the bishops who are teaching hopefully all in communion with each other. They're all teaching the same thing, one hopes. If they're not, then you got a problem that has to be solved, which has happened in the history of the church. I'm not going to lie, whitewash anything. And these are not all the bishops of the Catholic Church. I'm talking about the Catholic Church here. There's just some representative bishops. I think that's the Bishop of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. I think he's the Bishop of Fiji. Some of these guys might not even be alive anymore when I did this picture. That's my bishop, Patriarch Sviatoslav of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, the head of the Armenian Catholic Church, the Ethiopian Catholic Church. It's a bishop from Vietnam. Different people. Anyways, and then this guy, who's also a bishop. The Pope is just a bishop, okay, who has a special title, all right? Pope. But he's the Bishop of Rome. And it's their communion in the faith, but also their communion with the Pope. What makes the Pope special, which I'll eventually get to when we talk about the Pope. Do I talk about the Pope now? No, I don't. Okay. When I talk about the apostles in the church, I'll talk about a little bit about the position of the Bishop of Rome, because he's the successor of Peter, our guy Peter, who I mentioned before, the only one who had the faith to say, "You are the Christ," and the courage of the other apostles. And so he is designated as the first by Jesus amongst the apostles. The first in leadership, even though he's just an apostle like the others. He's not necessarily any better or worse than any of the other apostles. I hope not. I'm named after Matthew, the tax collector. So he's an apostle too. Anyways, but as he has a certain authority by his witness to the faith, he's strong in the faith, and that charism, that gift of his witness to Christ, was believed to have been passed on to his successors, those who succeeded Peter in his position. And that happened in Rome, where he died. He somehow got to the city of Rome in Italy, and it was killed there. Don't know how, it's by crucifixion, but who knows? They say that the story is, and I wasn't there, so I don't know, is that he was crucified upside down, okay? Which seems kind of awkward to me. But he was going to be crucified, and he felt that he was not worthy enough to be crucified in the same way that Jesus was. So he asked them to crucify him upside down, the reverse. So apparently they did. So whenever I watch those devil movies, you see the crosses turning upside down, I'm like, why is that scary? The devil has a devotion to St. Peter? Because it's a sign, you go. I have a picture of it actually on my computer from a Jesuit chapel when I taught at St. Peter's University, which is a Jesuit university. They have a big stained glass window in their chapel with an upside down cross for Peter. They're not devil worshippers. Devil's stupid. It really is. He's smarter than us, but he's stupid. He always overreaches. He always goes too far. So he's like, yeah, I'll turn the cross of Jesus upside down. Well, you're still honoring one of the great saints of Christianity, devil. So there you go. Anyway. So the Bishop of Rome in his position. So to be in communion with him, who is the successor of Peter, is paramount, and that's what makes up the Catholic Church. It's a communion of churches. It's not just one church. It is one church, but it's actually a communion of communities of Christians whose bishops are all in communion with the Pope of Rome. So, I'm a Catholic. I'm in communion with Patriarch Sviatoslav, who's the head of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, but he is in communion with Francis, Pope of Rome. If you ever broke that communion, you wouldn't be a Catholic bishop anymore. And I wouldn't follow him anymore. I'd find some other Yuki bishop, who's in communion with the Pope of Rome, Communion, the community. So that's what comprises the magisterium. And only the bishops, especially the Pope, have been charged with interpreting God's written and unwritten tradition. Not me. I'm a theologian. I think about the faith. But even in my case, I'm not sometimes you'll hear, they tried to float this idea, like back in the 60s, that there was a magisterium of theologians and stuff like that. Like in the Middle Ages, theological questions would be referred to the theological faculty at the University of Paris or something for a decision, and they'd advise the papacy or advise the bishops. Yeah, that happened, but they didn't have a teaching authority like Christ gave to the apostles and to their successors. They are the ones who are charged. And that can be difficult sometimes for theologians, because you'll hear them gripe about bishops, and the bishops are not as smart as they are, not as well read. Well, that's not the point. The point is not that hopefully the bishop is informed. Hopefully he's not dumb. I guess people can be dumb, hopefully he's educated. But that's not the point. That's not the basis of his authority to teach the gospel. It's his authority as a successor of the apostles and the one who's been given the grace of the Paraclete that Jesus mentions. Because he didn't give it to me as a theologian. I'm doing my best and hopefully not misrepresenting the message. What is the task of the magisterium? What is its purpose? Oh, wait a second. Do I want to do that? Yeah, okay, we'll get to that. Does anyone want to read this? This is from, I believe the reading, hopefully you did it, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 86. Does anyone like to read that? Go ahead, Ms. Murray.
Yet this magisterium is not superior to the Word of God, but its servants. It teaches only what has been handed on to it. At the divine command and with the help of the Holy Spirit, it listens to this devotedly, guards it with dedication, and expounds it faithfully.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Paragraph 86, and I tell you, they're quoting here from a document from Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, I think I mentioned before, Dei Verbum on Revelation, number 10. But the teaching authority, it's a control. Yes, it has authority or control, but it's a control of service. It's meant to be a servant of the message and to teach only what's been handed on. Okay? Not what it wants or hopes that might have been handed on. Okay? Which can cause kerfuffles. I'm not going to deny it, especially in the modern world. Well, in each age of the church, you can find things, different teachings of the church, depends on which one, and that, ruffled people's feathers they didn't like. And we have our own specific ones now in modernity. But it's not changeable. People are like, well, maybe give the church time, it will move the church this way. Okay, but you're going to have to explain why you were teaching it all that time before. You're teaching X and now you're teaching Y. Even though people might want you to teach Y. They think that Y should be taught. It can't if that's not what it's received from Jesus. It's always about Jesus. The magisterium is not the master, even though that's what the word comes from. It is a servant of the data of faith that is passing on to people, trying to get it right and keep it right. Because if they're getting it wrong, if they're sloppy with it, well, then I guess the bishops are dying in their sins just like I am. We're all lost, Hopefully they're taking it seriously. But the task of the magisterium is to pass on what it has received, not to control it. Not saying that never happens in the history of the church. That bishops and popes and priests and Christians themselves can lose sight of the focus. Okay, but then you need something like a renewal to bring people back. You always need a renewal, I think, to kind of get back to what is the purpose of Christianity, what's the purpose of the church. And I think God does that through various means. Sometimes they're not very nice means, or means we might want, but sometimes, they're necessary. So the church is listening to the message that she's preaching, guarding it and explaining it. That's what expound means. It's a fancy name for explaining it faithfully. So guarding it. So people don't understand that guardian rule. Sometimes people can misunderstand it, I think. But the church is kind of like a mama bear when it comes to the revelation of Christ. And sometimes she can lash out, if Mama Bear thinks you're going after her babies, like, you're walking through the forest and you're like, whoops, and somehow you come between the mother bear and the cubs. Watch out, And in the past, that's kind of like, I think, how the church could be. Was very protective of people, the membership of the church, and was very quick to identify errors that people might be teaching and things in the modern world which might be challenging God or challenging their teachings and stuff like that. So there's kind of a negative view and a negative aspect. And the church has tried to change that since the 1960s to be more positive in response. And now a lot of people have lost the faith. So how's that working for us? Maybe we should go back to the hellfire and the brimstone. I don't know. Anyways, but that's part of the guarding aspect of it. Sometimes, you have to be the bad guy. You have to tell someone they can't do something they want to do, or that the reality is not the way they would want it to be. Okay, continuing on. The mission, I'll read this. The mission of the magisterium is linked to the covenant, the agreement established by God with his people in Christ. So there's a bond here. There's a promise that God will protect his church, because otherwise, what's the point? I mean, if it's all just going to fall apart after Jesus goes to heaven or whatever, or after the last apostle dies, then it's kind of like, what's the point of it then? If it's all just going to fall apart eventually, if there can't be continuity baked into the system. And the magisterium, the teaching authority's task, is to preserve God's people from deviations and to give them the objective possibility of professing the true faith, the truth, without error. Okay? So the church might have to intervene at some times. There might be things that might develop amongst Christian belief that are aberrations, very aberrative. Some Christians might start believing that, well, since Jesus was God, therefore he wasn't really human. So he must have been like a ghost or a phantom. He was just a divine. He made a revelation, he appeared, but he wasn't real. He wasn't flesh and bone. He didn't walk amongst us. Some Christians believe that, even very early on in Christianity. And the church had to intervene and say, no, we knew him. Yes, we believe there was something divine or godlike about Jesus of Nazareth, but he was fully a human being. He had flesh and bones. He ate, he slept. Okay, he got tired. He could feel pain. He was not some phantom or ghost, which would have been maybe made the message of Christianity easier to take in, because people could believe that about Jesus. They could believe all the extraordinary things, even the resurrection from the dead. If you want to believe he's some kind of spirit, if he's spiritual, I could see that happening. But that doesn't happen to humans. That doesn't happen to people. So why would it happen to him? Okay, but the church had to say no. It might make the message easier. It might even make more sense in a way. But it's not the truth of what we knew about him. It's not part of the memory. It's not how we remember him. Okay, so it's meant to guarantee that the gospel or the good news about Jesus is not being misrepresented or misinterpreted or even manipulated. So the church might need to intervene. And she doesn't do that often. I mean, it's only certain times that the church might have to intervene. It's actually it's rare, I would say. It's more often than not, it's simply the regular preaching of positively what Jesus is and the message about him. Okay. Actually, hold on a second here. Okay, that's that. Oh, that's another alarm. My alarm is 12:01. All right, we got a few more minutes. And the belief is that the Holy Spirit is the guarantor of this. God himself will make sure that the message gets through. Through people, yes. And, sometimes they say God writes with crooked lines. And if you read the history of the church, there are enough crooked lines there. So, God is still dealing with human beings. And so, human beings, things don't always happen from A to B to C. Usually you go from A to J, then back to A, then all the way to Z. And then you can see that even in the gospel story, where things don't happen like logically. It's like Jesus is crucified, he's raised from the dead, everyone says hallelujah, everyone goes out preaching. No, that's not what happens, Jesus is crucified, his apostles are dispersed, they lose their faith, they go back to their old jobs. Some people say they're seeing Jesus, but they think they're out of their minds. And Jesus has to actually prove himself and appear to them. And then they kind of move out a little bit here and there, but they're not sure who to go to. Do they just go to the Jews? Can they go to Gentiles as well? they're not clear, So it's not like a logical move, okay? So again, you have to remember that you're dealing with, sometimes when you're dealing with, say, theology or theory, I'm organizing things in my lectures and stuff so that they move, hopefully, in a logical manner. You move from this point to that point to that point. That's not how it moves in reality. So if you ever read a history book of Christianity, that's not how it works. Nevertheless, that's the belief. So the church has no authority on her own to do things. The church has no authority to say Jesus was God if he wasn't God. Okay. Now you might say, well, the church developed that understanding of who Jesus was. Well, that's a different question. But the church has no authority just to say something is true about Christ or about anything on her own authority if it doesn't come from Christ or there's nothing there. She should only teach, the Pope and the bishop should only teach what they've received. So it's not their message, which sometimes popes and bishops can forget about because they want to get creative sometimes, and that can be a difficulty as well. And so other bishops might have to correct other bishops and say, look, that's not what we've been teaching. Actually, I read that already. So the magisterium's role or function, what it does, what service it provides for Christians, is not based on a human source or authority or power. It derives from the help of God based on Christ's promise to give his apostles a spirit of truth, which assumes that if you're going to the truth, you're not going to make mistakes. You might not express the truth in the proper way, which is not really a mistake, but you might express it according to your mindset of the time and culture you're living in. Okay, that's something different. But you're not going to, tell people that, okay, you should act this way for, maybe thousands of years. And then all of a sudden, well, now it's 2024. You don't have to act this way anymore. You can do this, the total opposite of this. No, that's not the church. I would say probably not the church being faithful to its charge. And in the readings, let's turn to the readings for one moment. I gave you two readings, one from Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, which is in the Old Testament, and another from the book of Acts, which is in the New, just to demonstrate this idea of teaching authority. Because what I'm teaching you or telling you is nothing new. Jesus didn't reinvent the wheel, nor did the apostles or the church. They got it from Judaism. Judaism had the same thing. They had writings that were revealed by God, but they also had an oral tradition that was passed on through the rabbis and the teachers of Israel, who had authority from God to do that. And so you see that in the book of Nehemiah, if you read it. Okay, Nehemiah and Ezra, who's this other guy, they have a reading of the law. They gather all the Jews in Jerusalem together, and they read the law to them. So they should know, because apparently a lot of them didn't know what to do. They didn't know the law, all right? They didn't know their scriptures. And so Ezra and Nehemiah, and also the Levites, who are priests, who are temple workers, they're reading the law. They set up a lectern above the people so they can hear it. They read the law out to them, and then the Levites, or the temple workers, are going amongst the crowd explaining what the words mean to the crowd. Okay, so what Ezra and Nehemiah are proclaiming to them, then the Levites will say, okay, it means this. This is how you're supposed to act. This is what you're supposed to do. So you see right there an example of magisterium or teaching authority. They had the authority because they were sacred persons in the community, ordained by God to minister in the temple of Jerusalem, and to have that authority to give decisions, make decisions on what the Torah, God's law or instruction meant. You see the same thing in a Christian context in Acts chapter 8, the other reading, where you have this man Philip, who's not Philip the Apostle. Some of you might think he's Philip the Apostle. It's actually another guy named Philip, who's a deacon, another person in the church. He's an ordained minister. But, he's walking along, and he hears this guy from Ethiopia, actually, far away. Apparently he's Jewish, because he's come up to Jerusalem to celebrate in the temple. And he's reading from the prophet Isaiah. He's reading from the Bible, from their Bible. But he doesn't understand what he's reading. It's a prophecy. Philip knows it's a prophecy about Christ, about Jesus. But the Ethiopian guy just doesn't know. He's like, I wonder, he's reading the literal words, he can understand them, but he's like, what does this mean? And Philip interprets it for him. Philip says, I will tell you. what the deeper meaning of this prophecy is. Yes, Isaiah the prophet had a meaning for his time that God meant, but also God sees forward what he's also leading to. And this part of Isaiah's prophecy is referring to Jesus of Nazareth. So he preaches the gospel. And the Ethiopian guy comes to believe. Again, magisterium. You have here, in this case, the written scriptures. Okay, yes, a scroll of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. But you have a church authority, Philip the deacon, who sits down with him and says, look, this is what it means. It preaches the message, the oral tradition. This is what it means. This is what you're reading. No, it doesn't mention Jesus, but it's about Jesus. Because that's what's been handed on to us. Okay? And he converts. The guy's like, well, what do? I believe in Jesus. Well, you're fine. No, he says you have to be baptized. You have to be dunked in water. And he's like, there's a pool of water. Let's do it right now, baby. So that's why, but if you go to the bathroom later, I'll be in there. We got a sink. Got some water. If you have I don't know. Don't do it if you're a Christian already, been baptized. You can't repeat the sacraments. But who knows? If the Spirit moves you, who knows? Do a few baptisms after class. But anyways, so again, that was just another example that we see, even amongst the Christians in the church, of magisterium, of teaching authority. And the other reading from the second letter of Peter was just a short reading, where Peter, in this letter, which I think was written by him, and I see no reason not to believe it was by this man, Peter, Simon Peter. Most New Testament scholars would say, no, it's not by him. But then again, how would they know? They're not there. But anyways, I don't think so. But I don't see any reason why not. Anyways, the second letter of Peter says that no prophecy of Scripture is subject to personal interpretation. Okay, he's talking about, when he's prophecy, I think you can extend that to all the scriptures. The sacred writings are not open to personal interpretation, which is why he's writing this letter to certain groups of Christians. He wants to explain how they're supposed to believe and why they're supposed to believe. Otherwise, he's wasting his time if he doesn't think he has magisterial authority to do that, or he thinks that he doesn't have some authority, and that his name, that he's Peter, Simon Peter, will command some respect in the community. Like, okay, it's Simon talking, so we need to save this letter, maybe. That's how we got it. Okie dokie. God bless you all. I will see you on Thursday. Oh, I'm almost done. Very nice. Thank you, Jesus. I don't think I have anything more to say, actually. Well, I might have one little thing to say. Miss Cohen. Move on, Dr. Dunn. Have a good day, miss. You're welcome. Have a good day. Let's see. 17th. Miss Egan. I don't think so. Mention that. Miss Goff. I think Miss Goff did. Means Miss Marita Murray. Miss Murray, that's right. Hello, sir.
What's going on? I started the test.
I'll take
I
Kish.
just knew I was going to get an A, and I did not get an A.
On what?
On that test that we took, the
Quiz?
Yeah, I got a 78, and I was like, oh, I take notes and everything. What's going on here?
What is going on?
I don't know.
Were the questions
I think I
hard?
was second. No, it wasn't hard. I think I was just like thinking it, second guessing. And then some questions was like the same questions. Like, well, if I didn't get it right the first time, I'll get it right if I choose to answer the second time.
Yeah. Well, better luck on quiz 2.
Yeah. How many quizzes do we have?
5.
Okay.
Scott and Mr. Robles. Mr. Chapman. We have 5 quizzes, Miss Cohen. Man, I'm sweating.
Yeah, it's hard.
Let's see here. I mentioned people, but I think she's the only one. Ms. Murray did the, Ms. Shatson, she did the, that's right. Shatson. Turn this off. Come on. Oh, man. Yes. Okay, but you're getting in the way. Come on.